Hello, my name is Edward F. King for Life Matters. If you've watched this program before, you've seen me as a guest, and this is my first time as the host of the program. And I'm just very excited and very delighted to be able to do this. I'm here on behalf of the Margaret O'Hara, that's the West Roxbury-Rosendale chapter of Massachusetts Citizens for Life. If you want to join us today in the conversation that we're going to have with a very special guest, you can do that by dialing 617-973-4848. And one of the reasons I said I was excited, and one of the reasons I'm excited is we have a guest, and if I were to tell you all of the things that he's accomplished in his life, it would take up all of the time we have for the program. So I'll just quickly give you some of the highlights. He served in the Massachusetts House of Representatives from 1970 to 1978. He served on the Boston City Council from 1977 to 1984. He was the mayor of Boston from 1984 until 1993. And then he served as the ambassador to the Vatican from 1993 to 1997. He's also an author of a best-selling book. He's also an old and dear friend of mine, Ray Flynn. Ray, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you.
Yeah.
I want to wish you well. I can't think of a better voice for the unborn and for social justice in our city than having you hosting this program.
Well, thank you.
Carrying on a great tradition of Massachusetts.
I was going to say the same thing about you. I was going to say that through all of those political offices and all of the things that you've done, you have been a stalwart, unbending, unyielding voice on behalf of the pro-life movement, and for that we are all very, very grateful.
Well, I'll tell you, I get my inspiration, Ed, in many respects, from the people who have led this movement over the many, many years. Just recently, in fact, at the Boston Common last Sunday, a very cold and rainy day, and to see those hundreds of young people from all across Massachusetts marching for Respect for Life Sunday really gives you that adrenaline, and it gives you that motivation to continue the effort, because you know they value and they appreciate the sanctity and the dignity of life, and which can only motivate a person.
Amen. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, and I think our audience would be interested in this. You served in the Vatican as the ambassador to the Vatican for 4 years during the 90s. How often, and I'm not asking you to be specific quantitatively, but how often did the abortion issue come up in your discussion with Vatican officials? Is this a priority with them, or do they give it lip service?
At the time was the so-called Cairo conference, where for the very UN conference, for the very first time, they were going to change the world policy on getting aid that it would require that you have an abortion on demand platform in order to be eligible, the countries to be eligible for this aid. Well, the United States and a number of countries were trying to change the policy so abortion on demand would be permissible under the requirements of receiving aid from the UN. The Holy Father, John Paul II, whom I had met in Boston here in September of 1969 and worked very closely with him over the years, he really took this challenge head on. And he took on the big countries of the world, the United States and Britain and Germany and France, and he organized some of the smaller countries. And people said that he could never win this battle to make sure that respect and dignity for the unborn was not compromised in foreign policy, world foreign policy. And I saw him repeatedly, continuously. And Ed, I know you know this, but he was one of the greatest communicators of all time.
Yes, he was.
And he had this kind of effect and this kind of impact on world leaders. And he changed that whole thing around. So I was there 5 years at the Vatican. It was a regular conversation because of the fact that John Paul II was unwavering in his commitment for the rights of the unborn. And he didn't care how popular it was or unpopular it was, or even what the various leaders had to say.
He didn't put his finger up in the air the way
No, it was an inspiration for me to see this great leader not compromising his values, even if it meant that he had to pay a price for it.
Yes. And my memory is that some of his allies were the Islamic countries, for example, and some of the countries that might not normally be friendly to us, but that did agree with him on that.
Well, the United States was using this leverage of money, and you're talking about a lot of poor countries
Yes.
that needed this money to build wells so you could get clean water, economic development, move their country forward, which they didn't have
Right.
the kind of resources. So the UN had the purse strings. So it would have been easy for them to say, well, look, I may have a pro-life policy, the Philippines, for example,
Yes.
a strong Catholic country. However, I need the money. This country needs the money. The people need the money. But John Paul II would provide that encouragement and leadership
For them to stand up.
for them to stand
Yeah.
up. And Ed, when he first came to Boston, I was there with him. It was October 1st, 1979,
In the rain.
in the rain.
I remember that.
And part of the first words that he said to the young people there, to all the people there, be not afraid.
Yeah.
See, this is what he did. He inspired people, encouraged people, he motivated people, and he told us all, do not be afraid to say what is morally right and what is in your heart and what is in your conscience. Now, all of us through our lives, whether it be politics or business or even in our family, don't we always compromise?
Always do.
To do things, but he would not
Yeah,
compromise
no,
on
he
that
would never
issue.
compromise.
No?
I remember a couple of times when he just absolutely amazed me was when the Polish government told him he couldn't come to Poland.
Right.
You're not welcome here, you can't come. And his answer was, what are you going to do, shoot the Pope? And he went.
Yeah.
And the other time, I remember when President Clinton and his wife welcomed him here, and of course they had followed a very pro-abortion group of policies in their administration. When he came here, the first thing he did was get up and give a speech on the pro-life issue, right in front of the President of the United States. So he was not afraid of anybody.
Not afraid of anybody. And you know, he'd always say, Ed, that everything changes except the truth.
Yeah.
And that's what made him unique. He was a
Yeah.
great communicator, but a person of enormous credibility and standing, and he would not compromise the truth, no matter what the political
Well, it
consequences.
says in the Bible, the truth shall set you free.
Right,
And
exactly.
I believe that. Another question, Ray, that I've always wondered about, I served, as you may remember, for 3 years as the chairman of the Boston Finance
Right.
Commission during the administration of Mayor Kevin White. And this issue never came up at the time, so I don't know the answer to the question. How much authority or power does the mayor of Boston have over, for example, the Boston City Hospital, which performs abortions? Could the mayor of Boston, if he wanted to, put a stop to
Most
that?
of your money that is in goes into the Boston City Hospital, even at that time, is federal money. If you didn't get the federal money, you would close the hospitals. And if you didn't implement all the regulations, you couldn't pick or choose.
Yeah.
If you didn't implement the regulations that the federal government laid out, then you didn't get the money, you'd then close the hospital.
Yes.
And you couldn't do that.
So the mayor really doesn't have a whole heck of a lot.
Doesn't have a heck of a lot. I mean, you still have the bully pulpit, which in my case was pretty significant.
Yeah.
We had the very first pro-life march and rally at Faneuil Hall, the first year I was mayor of Boston, and it was the very first time that a public building was used for a pro-life rally and educational seminar. And it got a lot of opposition from certain groups of people. But nonetheless, here it was, the cradle of liberty, the birthplace of American democracy. The big event that they had, the first event that they had, was a pro-life rally and march.
Yeah, I do remember that, too. Ray, here's a question for you that I always think about, and recently something happened. It couldn't have been more than a couple of months ago. There was a young lad from Chelsea. And the story, very briefly, is that he's in his late teens. I think he's 19. He wanted to go to college. He had to get certain papers and documents, his birth certificate and so forth, in order to go to college. And lo and behold, he found out that he was not a citizen, that his parents had brought him here as a child illegally, never told him that it was illegal, never bothered to do the necessary paperwork and apply for citizenship. And now, all of a sudden, because he had publicly applied to this college, the immigration authorities are after him, and they're going to deport him. And all of the politicians, all of the stories, all of the press sympathized with this young man, as I did. He was a good boy, he got good marks, he never had a police record, he had no detentions in his schools or anything like that, and he was a very deserving and very bright young man. And all of a sudden they're going to kick him out of the country. Not because he did something wrong, but because his parents did something wrong. And it dawned on me that everybody was defending him and saying we should not punish him for what his parents did. But isn't that what an abortion is? Don't we punish the baby because maybe the father was a rapist, or maybe the mother and father were incestuous, or maybe they weren't careful with their contraceptive techniques, or for whatever reason they have an unwanted pregnancy? But the baby is not the guilty one.
Well,
why do we punish the baby?
This was one of the leading questions and leading debates going way back to 1973, when the very first pro-life bill was introduced in the Massachusetts legislature. Charlie Doyle from West Roxbury was a strong leader, as Jim Craven from Jamaica Plain was. And people get up there, and that's when they were trying to change the terminology. They were trying to change it from protection of the unborn in pro-life, and they were trying to change it to choice and change it to fetus, not the unborn. So, Ed, it's really a question of how you define the terminology that you in fact use. If we had more effective ability in the media to reshape the argument on this question that you raised, we could change the outcome by just changing the terminology. If we could say, no, this isn't about just you and your body, in your rights. This is a life. This is another person inside you. And that person, in liability and insurance liability and criminal liability, if it's an automobile accident, that is a life.
Absolutely.
The courts recognize that as a life. But when you get to places like the Massachusetts legislature, they say the rights of the individual supersede the rights of an unborn baby, and that is wrong.
And that's an issue that I was going to, I'm glad you said that, because I was going to ask you about that too. We've literally changed the language to accommodate the pro-abortion movement. We don't say kill, we say terminate.
Yeah.
We don't say boy or girl or baby, we say fetus. And I remember reading, well, you can read in the Bible, it says that Mary was with child. It does not say anything about a fetus or a growth inside. It says Mary was with child. How did that happen? How did we allow this language to change?
The day that this decision came in, January 22nd, 1973, it was an enormous...
That was the Roe versus Wade.
That was the Roe v. Wade case.
Yeah.
It was an amazing impact that it had for many people. Now just think, on January 21st, it was a criminal offense to perform an abortion, even for a doctor to perform an abortion in Massachusetts. The next day, it was totally permissible. It was okay. I mean, people were caught off guard. They were unprepared. And if it weren't for groups like the Massachusetts Citizens for Life, Dr. Jefferson and Dr. Stanton and Phil Moran and all those people, they were the ones that really started to educate, inform politicians, people in government, and they certainly informed and educated a lot of us. Unfortunately, there's not enough of that. We don't have the resources. We have good people, wonderful leaders, but we just don't have the resources. Ed, to win elections, you're good at this business yourself. You need money, media, and message. Well, we've got a great message because it's rooted in the truth.
It is the truth.
We don't have money, and we don't have the media. In order to win elections, you need those three things.
You need those three. I'm always fascinated with when they do a poll. It depends on how you frame the question.
Yeah.
While we were having lunch earlier today, I used this example, and I'll use it again. If you went out in the street and asked people if you believe people should have the freedom to choose and make their own choices about them, everybody would say yes, But if you went out in the street and said, do you believe that if it can be proven that a man is a rapist, that we should kill his children? 99% of the people would say, no, of course not. We don't visit the sins of the father on the son or on the daughter. But yet that's exactly what we do. And of course, I'm using rape, which is an extreme example. A small percentage, 1/10 of 1% or something like that of abortions are a result of a rape. Most of them are not. They're just simple choices that people make. And that is, to me, is horrific. But the other thing I wanted to ask is, we do a lot of things in our country that restrict people's choices. You could make a list a mile long. You can't park in a crosswalk, you get a ticket. You can't drive 80 miles an hour on the turnpike, you'll get a ticket. You do it too often, you lose your license. You can't drink to excess and then go out and drive an automobile. You could end up in jail if you do that. So this idea that we can just choose whatever we want to choose is nonsense. That's a false argument. We can't. Legislators have the right, given to them by the people, to make regulatory rules and regulations. So how did this word choice become such a part of the pro-abortion movement?
Well, I think they recognized that they couldn't win the war or win the legislative battle by being against life. We were pro-life. They were trying to distort, try to turn the terminology around. So we were anti-abortion or anti-women,
right,
as I used to be criticized.
And the media bought their argument.
Well, of course.
And uses their language.
And they use their language,
yeah,
and they put politicians in a very vulnerable and a defensive position. So people who are politicians say, I'm going to change my position. I believe in the dignity and the respect of human life, but I don't want to be against, the woman's right to choose. And as a result of that, it turned the whole debate around, unfortunately. And that's why you're seeing so many politicians, Democrat and Republicans, that in their heart of heart, I believe that they are pro-life.
They know better.
They know better.
Yeah.
In fact, if you look at their records earlier, you'll find that they were pro-life, and they did vote pro-life. But because the terminology has been changed, they don't want to be on the short end of that deal. That's why it is so important for people in the pro-life movement. And they do this well, but there has to be more of them, and they have to have more effective use of the media. That's why a program like this is very, very important. But they need to get out there and they have to debate this issue in the public and civic arena, because once they do, and if they do, this whole issue will turn around. It will become, look, I was the highest vote getter in the history of the city of Boston. I was pro-life 100%. I got elected in every precinct in every ward, never lost a precinct or a ward in Boston, including some of the liberal as well as the conservative areas. If people believe that what you say is what you believe,
and you mean it,
and you mean it, they will vote for you. They will respect you.
I think that's right. Well, I think that's the definition of leadership. I've been very frustrated. I think we talked at lunchtime. When I was a boy, leadership meant leadership. It meant that you took an issue, you presented it to the people, and you became an advocate, a salesperson for that point of view, and you brought the public along. That's leadership. I'm amazed and dismayed at politicians today, who do this, take a poll, get a focus group or whatever they call those things, and they find out what the majority seems to think on the subject, and then that's the position.
I don't know whether or not it's really what the majority of people think, Ed. I think what it really is, it's the people who are the activists. They dominate the conversation. They dominate the public opinion. But if you were to walk down the supermarket or Roach Brothers in West Roxbury tonight, and you stop just Mrs. O'Malley or Mrs. Saratino, and you'd say to them, what do you think of the pro-life? Oh, I'm with you all the way, Mr. Flynn, Mr. King. Yes. I'm with you all the way. But when they get these focus groups and the pollsters and the slick ads on television and
they
radio,
rework the question.
And rework the question. Yeah. I think people get confused, and I think their point of view is misrepresented. I really believe it's misrepresented in the media and by these various groups. And take my word for it, as you well know, the other side is very well organized, they're very well financed, and they have tremendous media access.
Well, they also make money off
They do.
off abortion. Some of the abortion clinics and the abortion doctors and so on and so on are multi-million-dollar industries, and the pro-life people don't have that option. We have about 2 minutes left, and if somebody wants to call in, again, I want to give that number. It's 617-973-4848. We got about 2 minutes, so if there's one call that wants to come in, you can talk to the former mayor of Boston, former ambassador to the Vatican. Did I ever tell you that I came to visit you at the Vatican when I was in Italy? And you weren't there. You were back here in the United States visiting
I was on
your
official
family.
business.
Yeah, you were on official business back in the United States.
It was a wonderful, wonderful experience.
It
My
must
wife
have been.
Kathy and
Yeah, it must have been.
our children had. I'll tell you, I was very surprised. I thought we spoke Italian and understood Italian and loved the Italians as much as we do.
Yes.
Only to talk to you this afternoon, and you could razzle-dazzle anybody, even Italians speaking Italian.
The funny thing is, I always used to tell people, my name is Edward F. King, which comes from my father. But my mother's name is Filomena Fumento. So you got to be very careful when you deal with me. You got that hidden part.
You should have done that when you were running for office.
I did. I
Did you?
gave some speeches in Italian, and to some of the Italian American clubs and so on. They were wowed. You know, of course, the question is, how does a guy named King get to speak Italian? The answer is my mother's family. We're coming to the end, and I want to tell you, it has been a delight. It always is. Ray Flynn has been a friend of mine for 30-some years, and I've always found him to be totally credible, man of great integrity. When he says something, that's what he means, and that's what he does, so you don't have to worry about that. And on this issue, we agree. Someday we ought to get together and debate some of the issues on which we don't agree. That might
We'll
even
need
be
boxing
more,
gloves for
yeah,
that
might
one.
even be more fun. But I've enjoyed this, and I thank you very much for being with us today. We're going to put up on the screen the websites for Life Matters and for Mass Citizens for Life. And if any of you want to get in touch with us, I'll be back again in about a month. Other people will be taking this program on a weekly basis. We'll have some more interesting guests for you. And I have enjoyed this immensely, and we'll look forward to doing it again. Thank you very much for watching us.